Hej och välkomna till Aktiespararnas digitala aktiedag här i Stockholm den 16 mars 2021. Mitt namn är Peter Malmström och jag kommer att vara moderator under den presentation av Abliva som vi snart kommer att lyssna till. Efter presentationen så går det bra för er som lyssnar in att ställa era frågor till bolagets vd Ellen Donnelly, och hur ni kommer att kunna göra det kommer att framgå på skärmen som ni har framför er. Nu tycker jag att vi lämnar ord och bild till bolaget och till Ellen Donnelly. Please be welcome and I hand over the picture and the word to you, Ellen. Please and very welcome.
Thanks, Peter. It's good to be here. So my name's Ellen Donnelly. I'm the CEO of Ablieva. I joined the company on February 1st this year. I have a background in both biotech and pharmaceuticals. So I was living in Stockholm from 2016 to 2020. And during that time, I was the CEO of another rare disease company called Modus Therapeutics. We were focused on sickle cell disease, and we had a phase 2 asset. Unfortunately, that asset read out negative. So that was a big disappointment. I have a training in drug development from Pfizer. I was at Pfizer for almost a decade in a variety of different roles, everything from clinical operations to portfolio and project management, neuroscience research, and consulting. But my PhD is in science. I have a PhD in pharmacology from Yale, and then I went into management consulting. So a little bit of experience in research development and in commercial. I'm super excited to tell you this story today because I think Ablaeva is probably one of the underappreciated and undervalued companies in Sweden. And so I hope you'll follow along with the story. So the first thing I thought we should talk about is the numbers, because once we talk about the numbers, we can dismiss them and we don't have to talk about them again. Over on the left, you can see our assets and liabilities as of December 30th, 2020. The company is supported by about 13,000 shareholders who have really kept with us through the ups and the downs. So we truly appreciate that group. We have a low, but hopefully increasing share price, and our market cap right now is 25.5 million US. I think what you'll hear about today is 2 blockbuster opportunities in our portfolio. And I just want to highlight that we're supported by 8 very dedicated employees at Ablieva. But Ablieva, it's not about the numbers. I speak about them, but we don't live them. What we focus on is the patients in the company, and the patients are our core. We talk about them every day. This disease, these primary mitochondrial diseases, are devastating disorders. The patients get them, and it's a chronic progressive disease that leads to early mortality. You can learn about our patients if you want to go on the website, or you can learn about 2 patients with PMD. You can meet Rebecca and meet Roger. They'll tell you their stories. And I think you'll find it interesting because it really lets you feel the patient experience when people have PMD. So we do a lot with the patients. We want to understand their disease, understand their manifestations of their disease, and then that helps us better treat the patients. We also work a lot with the patient advocacy groups. So you can see some of those listed here. It's a true team effort at Ablieva, and we work with patients, we work with physicians, and we work with regulators. And I hope you'll realize that through this presentation. Okay, so now we'll get into the real stuff. This company, our goal is to become the premier mitochondrial medicine company in the world. We have a portfolio of assets that are focused on a rare disease called primary mitochondrial diseases. This is a group of diseases that we'll talk more about. We have a fast to market rare disease approach. I bring that up because it brings opportunities for us, both to work with the regulators to get to market faster, and it brings a large commercial opportunity as well with blockbuster potential. As I mentioned, we have an experienced team. The team is experienced in both research and in development. Both our CSO and our CMO have been working in this area for over 2 decades. So there's a lot of experience in the group. And we're publicly traded, as we just saw. So this is our portfolio. We have our primary program is the KL1333. You'll hear a lot about that today because that asset is about ready to go into a registrational study. And that means that once the study reads out, if it reads out positive, we can go for approval of that drug, and then we can go market that drug. That is focused on a subset of patients with primary mitochondrial diseases. These patients have a spectra of disease called MELIS-MID. They could have KSS or they could have CPEO. We're focused on those particular diseases because that will allow us to get a stronger signal in our clinical study. As you've probably heard, when you do a clinical study over a heterogeneous patient population, you often get mixed signals. And we wanted to make sure that our patient population was as homogeneous as possible so we could get a positive result. Our second asset is NV354. That asset has a different mechanism of action and is targeting a disease called Lee syndrome, which we'll talk a bit more about. We also have an early program. We have a research lab at Lund University, headed by our CSO, Eskil Elmer, and they're focused on developing other programs for our portfolio. I think it's worth mentioning one of the things that's exciting about this portfolio is the opportunity to get some regulatory consideration for our programs. And so we've applied for and received orphan drug designation for the lead program in both the US and the EU. So that's exciting. So you may be asking me, what are primary mitochondrial diseases? I've never heard about these. That's not uncommon. So they are rare diseases. It's a group of diseases, and they're often named by the mutation in the mitochondria. Maybe it's the location of the mutation in the mitochondrial DNA. So they're a bit hard to remember, as you probably noticed from the names of the diseases on the last slide. So these are devastating rare diseases. They have severe symptoms, and they cause continuous deterioration. And why is that? That's because the mitochondria of the patient is disrupted. There's something wrong with the mitochondria. And so the mitochondria can't do what it's supposed to do in your body. It usually acts as your powerhouse of your cells, creates energy, and that energy is used to do everything that you need to do during the day. But in this disease, the mitochondria are disrupted, they're deficient, and they're not producing energy. And that's super important. If you need to remember anything today, it's that primary mitochondrial diseases, you have no energy. And that energy is important for your cells, for your breathing, for your heart rate, but it's also important for you as a person to maintain your activities of daily living. This happens because we have defects in something called the electron transport chain. And when that's defective, we have abnormal oxidative phosphorylation. There is one approved drug for this, but it's specifically for the eye. So there are no approved medicines for the systemic PMD. These patients are usually maintained with kind of supportive therapy. They may be given nutraceuticals or nutritional supplements in order to feel better, but there's nothing. They have nothing. We can talk a little bit about the competitive space. It's actually pretty open. You do normally see many more companies working in competition with each other. I would say our primary competitors right now are Mitobridge, who is acquired by Astellas. They have a PPAR delta modulator, and that's focused on a more broad indication called primary mitochondrial myopathy. A second program led by Renio, also they have another PPAR delta modulator, and they also are looking at this broader indication. Those are really our two competitors. They're both entering phase 3 this year as well. So I think the first way we differentiate from them is that we do place the patient first. And I think you'll see that in everything we do. We've done a lot of collaboration with both patients and patient organizations, and we participated in a meeting called the Voice of the Patient with the FDA. And these were important interactions because it really helped us understand the disease and what the patients see as their primary issue with this disease. And what we heard from the patients time after time, every patient, it's fatigue. I can't do what I need to do during the day. So many of these patients, they have to stop working or they go to a reduced workload. They plan their day amazingly so that they can do exactly what they need to do. So we've heard from patients, if I have to go to the grocery store, I can do it, but I know I'm going to have to sleep a lot afterwards. Or perhaps my longest work day is Friday because I know I can sleep all day Saturday. They're meticulous in their planning. We even had one patient tell us that she's in a wheelchair. And she said, if you can help me with anything, it's my fatigue. And these patients, the way they explain it, they're not tired. It's not the tired that we know. It's not I was up late and I'm tired at my first morning meeting. This encompasses your entire being. And so because of that, we've decided to use fatigue as our primary endpoint. We've also done some work looking at the patient population to understand who are the best patients to include in our study. And that's indicated here by this registry study. We use the UK MITO cohort to understand whether we'd be able to recruit this patient population that we've chosen and kind of how the disease progresses in these patients. And the third thing we're doing with patients is we're validating this primary endpoint because we want to get into the study and know that we have a strong, robust primary endpoint, and we're going to be able to get efficacy from that. One of the other ways we're differentiated is we're really focused, as I mentioned, on choosing the right patient. And we're doing that by creating or studying and deciding upon a subset of patients that are most likely to respond to our drug. And that you can see indicated here. We're also looking for patients that have a particular phenotype or a particular expression of the disease. So we're looking for patients that have chronic fatigue, myopathy, and mitochondrial diabetes. And that's important because we'll look at endpoints or include endpoints in our study that will look at improvement in those different things when the patient is on KL1333. So we're trying to figure out how to do a study that's homogeneous and will allow us to get a strong signal and supported by our preclinical data. The benefit of doing this as well is it will reduce the competition from our competitors. And although we're picking a small slice of the patient population, it does translate into a rather large opportunity with this. This is over $1 billion opportunity or a blockbuster drug. One of the things that's super important in rare diseases is that you collaborate with the physicians as well, because the people that are treating these patients know what they need most. So we have built a strong advisory network of physicians and clinicians, research scientists that really know mitochondrial disease inside and out. And we have some of the leading experts in the world in this. They help us understand the disease, they help us design the clinical study, and then they help us talk with regulators when we're ready to do that. I can't go without mentioning the team. Team at Ablieva is amazing. I think I've mentioned that previously, but this is really a group of dedicated and driven drug development expertise. So I feel fortunate to be working with them on a daily basis. We're supported by a strong board as well. One of the things the company did last year was bring in Hadean Ventures, our first specialist investor into the company. And Roger Franklin, a partner at Hadean, has joined us on the board. So that was a nice first step as we try to take the company to the next level. So that's just a bit about our company. I'll tell you a bit now about the compound. But before I do that, I'd like to just stress, this really is a team approach. We can't do any of this alone. We look to the people, we look to the physicians and the patients to help inform our program. We look to the researchers, and we have a nice collaboration with the regulators too, which you'll hear about. All of that informs a strong and robust program for KL1333. Okay, so what is this magic drug? This drug, KL1333, changes the balance of your NAD plus NADH ratio. And that might not mean anything to you, but what's important to remember here is that's leading toward ATP generation. And ATP generation leads to energy production. And so what happens in these patients that have primary mitochondrial diseases is they don't have good energy production. So our drug is going to go in there and help with that. Help increase the energy and help increase the production of the mitochondria, which is really important. What we believe is that these mitochondrial deficits cause a lack of energy, and that leads to organ dysfunction and disease deterioration. So it's our hypothesis that if we can fix this energy production problem and help the patient get more mitochondria in their system, that we could not only be symptomatic, but we could also have a disease modifying effect. Here you can see some data. We wanted to show you a bit of data today. You can see patient data on the left, where we've looked at controls and patients, and you can see that the patients have a lower level of NAD plus in their blood, as well as in their muscle. Also, the group went on to show that the function is improved if they're given an NAD supplement. So this data kind of confirms the hypothesis first, that NAD plus levels are low in these patients. And second, by improving those levels, you can get improved function. So that's a nice kind of proof of principle for what we're trying to do. The drug actually works kind of as a ping pong. It cycles through the mechanism, donating hydrogens to the ATP and causing an increase of energy. So I mentioned this causes not only an increase in energy, but new mitochondria, symptom reduction, and disease modification. Here's some data that we have in patient fibroblasts. So these are patient cells from MELIS patients, as you can see in the title. We have healthy volunteer cells. These are just normal cells, and you can see the NAD plus NADH ratio. Then we have the disease cells coming from MELIS patients. And then you can see in these cells, we added KL1333. And you can see that this brought the level of NAD plus up in those cells. The same thing happened with mitochondrial mass. Again, you can see a normal cell disease cell, and then with KL1333. So again, kind of confirmation of the proof of principle here. So what are we doing now? The team at Ablaeva is extremely busy doing everything we can to de-risk the phase 2/3 study that we're about to run. And that's really what we're trying to do, is we're trying to understand every aspect of the study and say, okay, how can we make that less risky so that when we start this study, we have a higher likelihood of success? Because as I mentioned, this is one study and we're going for approval. So the ongoing studies right now, we have a phase 1A, 1B study that's going on. This study included both healthy volunteers, and we also included a group of patients in the study to better understand the PK profile of patients when given KL1333. We're running a drug-drug interaction study. This is important because many of these patients will come into the clinical study on other drugs, and so you want to understand how their metabolizing enzymes work. So that's another study that it just helps us in the clinical study. We're running that patient registry study, or that natural history study I told you about, to figure out and optimize our patient selection criteria for our study. And then we're running this validation study where we're looking at the primary endpoint, fatigue, and validating that. And I'd like to say that one of the things that I think is unique about the Abliva program is we go to the FDA and the regulators early, and we go often. And that's been shown to be one of the keys to success in drug development, and something that we feel very strongly about, because it's through that discussion with the FDA, the MHRA, and the EMA that we can make the program better and know that what we do in the phase 2/3 study will be supported by the regulators. So Abliva has gone to the FDA both in a pre-IND meeting and in a type C meeting to help ensure that this program was fit for purpose for the phase 2/3 study. Our upcoming phase 2/3 study is scheduled to start at the end of the year. As we mentioned, it's going to include a more narrow population of patients in order to ensure a more positive result. It's a randomized, double-blind, parallel group, placebo-controlled study. We're going to treat these patients for 12 months. And so these patients will really have a chance to see whether this drug works. I'm sure many of you have heard of shorter studies, and we often do that, but sometimes they come out negative and you wonder, oh, is it just because the drug didn't have enough time to work? So in discussion with the FDA, we all decided that 12 months was the optimal dose of treatment here. We have an adaptive design in the study and expect to enroll over 100 patients. And our endpoints, as we've discussed, our patient-reported fatigue is our primary. And then we have a number of secondaries. And as you probably know, in rare disease, it's all about the composite of the results. So what we're looking to show is efficacy across a number of different parameters. So our primary endpoint is important, but the secondaries are equally as important. So we have functional endpoints and biomarker endpoints that hopefully, when combined with that primary endpoint of fatigue, will paint a nice picture of efficacy of our drug. The second program I'm just going to highlight briefly, NV354. This compound actually came out of our research efforts. So this is homegrown from Abliva. It's targeting a program called Lee syndrome. And in this disease, it involves severe multi-organ deterioration, and these children actually die quite young. So they'll die before 5 years of age. It's actually, they're born fairly normal, and it's not until they get a cold or a virus that they get sick and they realize that they have PMD. This isn't an energy replacement therapy, but a different mechanism than the one we just talked about. And the nice thing about this drug is there is expansion potential. So we're going to start in Lee syndrome, but it could expand very easily into LHON, which is another PMD disease. A bit about the drug. It's a prodrug of succinate. And so succinate is a natural product made by your body. We're kind of amping up the amount of succinate you have. Succinate actually comes in, it skips or bypasses complex 1 of the electron transport chain and comes into complex 2. And that's important because in many of these patients, the complex 1 is deficient. And so by skipping that, you just end up pumping more succinate into the system. So we also believe this compound will have disease modifying potential. It's also first in class. And we believe that will protect mitochondria and the loss of organ function in these patients. Some short-term milestones for those of you that are interested in investing in the company. KL1333, we expect the results of the phase 1A, 1B study the first half of this year. We also expect results from our drug-drug interaction study. And as I mentioned, we're looking to start the phase 2/3 study, our big registrational study, by the end of the year. For the second compound, NV354, we're currently completing some preclinical safety studies that should complete at second half of the year. And then we hope, if those studies are positive, to declare a clinical candidate. So we would, at that point, say we have the preclinical data necessary to know that this compound is able to go into patients. That leads us to an IND submission, and then we would hope to start a phase 1 clinical study, hopefully in the first half of next year. So you've learned a little bit about Ablieva in the last 20 minutes. As I mentioned, our goal is to become the leading mitochondrial medicine biotech company in the world. You've learned about our portfolio of assets, KL1333 and NV354. You've seen our fast to market rare disease approach, and you've learned a bit about our team. Again, we're a publicly traded company, and you can find us on the NASDAQ Sweden. But I don't want to end there. I want to end with the patients, because this is all about the patients. I encourage you to go onto our website and watch these videos, because I think it will really give you a flavor for what these patients experience. This isn't just I'm tired. This is a very, very devastating disease that can impact most of your body. So these patients may have heart issues, they may have respiratory issues, they often have hearing loss, they could have blindness. You know, mitochondria are in every single cell in your body except your red blood cells. So you can imagine any cell in your body could be impacted in this disease. So I thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Ellen. You've given us a good update of where you are, what assets you're working with, and where you're heading, and what is the kind of things you would like to achieve. You have been with the company now for about a month. Let me ask you, what attracted you to the position as CEO, and what are your impressions of the company so far?
Great question. So my first CEO opportunity was another company in Sweden, as I mentioned, Modus Therapeutics. And I had the best time working at Modus. We also were working in a rare disease, and I found it's so invigorating, and it gives you so much a feeling of doing good when you're working in the rare diseases. You get to know the patients particularly well, and you really feel like you have the ability to impact somebody that has a disease. And so that was very attractive. I love primary mitochondrial diseases. I think there's a big opportunity here, and it's early enough so that we can really make a difference. So when I say we want to become the premier company, we could. Don't laugh. This is all attainable, and you have the team in Sweden and Lund to do that. So how could you say no to an opportunity like that?
Okay, thank you. You speak a lot about patients during the presentation, and the answer you just gave here, you mentioned patients. What's the kind of medical treatment that's available to those patients today? And because you are into change for those patients, but what's their opportunity today? What can be done to them?
Nothing.
Nothing.
So a patient is diagnosed with primary mitochondrial disease, and the next thing that the physician says, and I'm sorry, there's nothing to give you. What they're given right now is supportive therapy for their issue. So some of these patients will have an issue with their eyelids. So they have muscle weakness in many cases, and so their eyelids may droop. So they may have surgery to correct that, to correct their eyelids. They may have a cardiac problem, and they need a pacemaker. But that's what they get. And then for a day-to-day basis, they may be given coenzyme Q, creatinine, some sort of natural products, nutraceuticals, to try to make them feel like they're getting something.
Okay. What activities or milestones are you most looking forward to with Ablaeva?
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to dosing that first patient in the phase 2/3 study. This is a huge milestone for any company. And so that will be fun. That first patient that comes into the study is extremely important. In support of that, obviously, we're looking forward to reading out our phase 1 studies and submitting the IND. I think the IND, although it's kind of an operational thing, it's a big thing for a company, especially for Abliva, because we haven't been in the US yet. And so that will be our first checkbox from the US FDA when they approve the IND. So that's kind of fun. And then, of course, I work in drug development. I just want to take a drug to the market. So my big goal is obviously to get the KL1333 approved and get it into patients.
Okay. As an investor, why should I consider investing in Ablaeva?
Oh, I mean, this story is very exciting. I think as an investor, I would look at it as I think our share price right now is extremely low, so it's easy to get in. I think we have a lot of milestones over the next few years. One of the things we recognize is that we need to continue to generate value for the investors as we move through time. And so one thing the team and I really focus on is how we're going to generate value for you as an investor. And so I think that would be attractive. I also think that this is a very rare opportunity for an investor because we could have a marketable product in 3 or 4 years, depending on how the trial goes. Yep, and that's pretty rare that you can move from phase 1 to the market that quickly. So I think that's pretty attractive for investors too, that don't want to be committed for a 13-year development plan. Okay. We're shorter term than that.
Yeah. The kind of programs that you're running, it's needs capital, it's costly. And I've understood that you've been looking towards the US market in that perspective. And I've understood that Boston has been mentioned, office in Boston. Can you share a little bit about the thoughts about being in the US and being in Boston and so forth?
Absolutely. I think, as you mentioned, there's a lot of capital in the US right now, and we all see that. We see the highly, highly valued companies. 2 of our competitors, actually, one of them just did a Series B for 95 million US. So there is a lot of money in the US, and we would obviously like to capture some of that. But the US also brings other opportunities. So we will be running a study in the US and Europe, and so it's important to have kind of boots on the ground in the US to do that. It's also important to have the visibility from companies and communication companies. We want the visibility and the perception of Ablieva to improve. So that's important with the US as well. So there's a number of reasons to move to the US, I think. And we will never move out of Lund. The team in Lund is fantastic, and we're fully committed to staying in Sweden. But just having a few people in the US, even to help start our commercial activities, as we think about launching the product, it'll be important to have a few commercial people. It won't be a big effort, but we do think it's important to have an effort. And we actually did sign our certificate of incorporation for a US office at the beginning of March. So that was exciting. Okay. So we're not building out a US office like you see in the US. We'll see biotech companies in Boston that have 40 to 60 people. Okay. Running a site like ours, and that's not our intention at all. We want the US presence to link into the US network, but that's about it.
Okay. I've gotten one question here on the screen. It says that you've been discussing the assets that you're working with now and towards the future. What about the assets that you had previously in your portfolio? Are they closed? Are they dismissed? Or what can be expected?
Thank you for asking that question. And I'm fully happy to talk about it. I think we have a couple of assets. As you know, the company has changed the strategy. We're focused on primary mitochondrial diseases, and we will look forward in primary mitochondrial diseases going forward. We have one asset, NB556. As you'll notice, it's not included in the quarterly reports. The development of that asset has been stopped. And then we have another program, which I think everyone is probably focused on, Neurostat, and that's waiting for a decision by Track TBI. And so stay tuned. We'll definitely communicate that as soon as we have an answer.
Okay, thanks for that update. Last question. What are the 3 most important things that you would like us to bring with us into the future and to follow when it comes to Ablaeva?
Okay, that's a great question. I think that the first thing I'd like you to remember is that we're focused on patients with primary mitochondrial diseases. Look for them. When you talk to friends and they mention they have a disease, look for these patients. Go on our website and understand this disease, because it's a really important and very impactful disease. I think the second thing you should remember is that we're about to start a registrational study. Yes. It's a big deal. That means we could have a drug out to the market in 3 or 4 years. And that's pretty amazing. And I think the third thing I'd like you to remember is that really Ablieva is full of an amazing group of scientists and drug development professionals. And I feel lucky to work with them on a daily basis. So you have a talented group of people in Lund that are trying to create drugs for an extremely needy population.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks for updating us, and we love to hear more from you soon when you participate in the next presentation like this, and you can bring us up to and let us know what has happened. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Bye.